Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into a really intense piece of writing, Paul's letter to the Galatians. This isn't some calm reflection. It sounds like it's written out of, well, deep passion and frustration, maybe even anger.
Oh, absolutely. It's an emergency letter, really. Paul had spent time setting up these churches in Galatia. We read about that in Acts.
Right?
And he gets word that things are going seriously wrong. The whole community he built, this mix of Jewish and non-Jewish people, it's basically on the verge of falling apart.
So our mission for this deep dive is pretty simple, really. We want to unpack this huge conflict that was defining early Christianity.
Yeah, the core question was this. Do non-Jews, the Gentiles, need to adopt Jewish law, the Torah, to truly be part of God's family?
And the stakes were incredibly high. I mean, this whole movement started within Judaism, right? In Jerusalem.
Exactly, a Jewish messianic movement.
Yeah.
But then it exploded outwards, and suddenly you have all these non-Jews joining, and they don't follow the traditional markers of Jewish identity found in the Torah.
Like circumcision, eating kosher, Sabbath observance, things like that.
Precisely. These were central practices for God's people, Israel, for centuries. So you can kind of see why some Jewish Christians show up in Galatia and think they're doing the right thing.
They're saying, hey, welcome, great, you're here. Now, to really belong, you need to get circumcised, follow the food laws, obey the Torah.
But for Paul, this wasn't just misguided. He saw it as completely undermining the gospel message itself.
He writes this fiery letter because these other teachers are challenging his authority and telling Gentile men they need this physical operation, this whole cultural shift, just to be accepted by God in Jesus' family.
Yeah, it's a crisis.
Okay, so let's look at how Paul tackles this.
Yeah.
First things first, he has to deal with the attacks on him personally. Right?
Uh-huh.
He opens up just expressing, like, total shock.
Yeah, bewilderment. He says, I can't believe you've so quickly deserted the one who called you for a different gospel. He needs to reestablish his credibility.
How does he do that?
Well, crucially, he argues his authority comes directly from Jesus, not from the Jerusalem apostles like Peter or James. He says the risen Jesus personally commissioned him for this mission to the non-Jewish world.
So he's not some rogue agent.
Not at all.
Yeah.
He emphasizes he only went to Jerusalem to consult the other leaders much later. And it wasn't like he was asking for permission. It was more like, here's what God's doing. Are we on the same page?
And what was the outcome of that meeting? Did they tell him, no, Paul, you've got it wrong, they do need circumcision?
No, completely the opposite, actually. They fully supported him. They agreed that non-Jewish believers didn't need to be circumcised or follow those specific laws.
They gave him the green light.
Full endorsement. They recognized God was working through Paul's approach. His mission of inclusion was confirmed by the top leaders.
Okay, understanding that makes the next story even more, well, dramatic. The incident in Antioch, this wasn't just some minor theological spat.
No, this was huge. It threatened the whole idea of a unified church. So Peter comes to Antioch, and at first, he's totally fine. He's eating with the non-Jewish Christians, the uncircumcised ones, mingling freely. It's a picture of unity.
Sounds good so far.
But then some other people arrive from Jerusalem. These guys represent that stricter group, the opposition.
The pressure group.
Exactly. And Peter, well, he caves. He gets intimidated or pressured, and he withdraws. Stops eating with the Gentiles. Avoids them.
Wow. Sending a pretty clear message there, isn't he? Like they're second class or unclean.
Precisely. And Paul sees this happen, and he doesn't just, pull Peter aside quietly.
No.
He confronts him publicly, accuses Peter, the lead apostle, of hypocrisy. He says Peter's actions contradict the truth of the gospel.
That must have been intense. He's basically saying forcing the Torah onto these new believers is just fundamentally wrong.
Yes. And that confrontation pushes Paul to lay out his core theological argument. For him, demanding Torah observance now that Christ has come isn't just unhelpful, it's a betrayal of the gospel.
And this is where he drops that foundational statement.
Right. The absolute core. People are not justified by the works of the Torah, but rather by the faith of Jesus the Messiah.
Okay, justified. That word sounds very theological, very formal. What does Paul actually mean by it? How should we understand it?
It's a rich term, pulls right from the Old Testament, often used in a legal or courtroom sense. To be justified means God declares you're in a right relationship with him.
So like declared not guilty.
Sort of, but much more. It means you're forgiven, you're welcomed into God's family, you're given a place, and you're being transformed by his grace. It's about being put right with God.
Yeah, Paul's saying that status, that right relationship, doesn't come from following the rules in the Torah.
Exactly. It can't be earned by human effort by doing the works of the Torah. It only comes through, as he says, the faith of Jesus.
Okay, but wait. If obeying God's own law, the Torah, doesn't make you right with God, isn't that kind of dismissing the law? I mean, wasn't it God-given?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Paul tackles it head on. He's not saying the law was bad or wrong. He's saying its purpose was specific and, crucially, temporary.
Temporary.
Yeah. It was given to guide Israel until the Messiah arrived. Now that the Messiah has come, insisting on the old rules as the way to get right with God, well, Paul sees that as suggesting Jesus' work wasn't actually enough.
Okay, that helps. Now, that other tricky phrase, the faith of Jesus. Does that mean our faith in Jesus or be Jesus' own faithfulness to God?
It's actually a bit dense, and scholars debate it, but it likely carries both meanings, which is pretty powerful. It definitely includes our trust in Jesus, our reliance on that.
Our believing in him.
Right. But it also points to Jesus' own perfect faithfulness, his unwavering obedience to God, his faithfulness all the way to the cross. Either way you slice it, Paul's point is the same.
Which is?
Justification, being made right with God, comes entirely through trusting what God did through Jesus. It's not based on what we do for ourselves, like obeying the law perfectly, which we can't do anyway.
That connection then leads to this really radical idea about identity, doesn't it? Substitution.
Oh, it's completely revolutionary. Paul argues that when someone trusts in the Messiah, Jesus, what's true of Jesus becomes true of them, spiritually speaking.
So his life, his death, his resurrection, it's credited to them.
In a sense, yes. This is where that incredibly famous line comes from. I have been crucified with the Messiah.
And it is no longer I who live, but the Messiah lives in me.
Exactly. Your old identity, defined by failure under the law maybe, is gone. Your new identity is found in Christ. The only reason anyone belongs in God's family now is because of what Jesus did for them, not because they kept certain external rules.
This really blows the doors open on who can be included, doesn't it? You don't need to become culturally Jewish first.
Absolutely. And Paul drives this home by going way back to Abraham in Genesis, the father of the faith.
What about Abraham?
Paul points out that Abraham was declared righteous or justified by God simply because he had faith, he trusted God's promise.
The promise that through him all nations would be blessed.
That's the one. So Paul argues, see, God's plan from the very beginning was always about creating this huge, diverse, multi-ethnic family based on faith, not adherence to the laws of the Torah, which came much, much later.
Okay, but that leads right back to the question you mentioned earlier. If faith was always the plan, why did God give the law, the Torah, to Israel at Mount Sinai? Was that like a detour?
Paul gives a brief, kind of dense explanation here. He unpacks it more in Romans, but essentially he says the law was given long after God's promise to Abraham. It was always intended as a temporary measure.
Temporary, okay, with a specific job to do.
Exactly. Paul gives it a kind of dual role. You could say negative and positive.
Let's start with the negative role. What was that?
Well, Paul says the law functioned like a magnifying glass for sin, or maybe like a perfect mirror. It didn't cause the sin, but it showed Israel and really all humanity just how deeply sin had taken root. It exposed the problem.
So it revealed the failure to meet God's standard.
Yes, and in doing so, it pronounced everyone guilty. Paul uses strong language. He says the law imprisoned everyone under the power of sin. It set the standard, but didn't give the power to meet it.
Okay, so that's the negative. It exposed the problem and locked everyone in. What about the positive role?
Paul also compares the law to a guardian, or maybe a strict school teacher. Its job was to supervise and keep Israel in line, manage the nation.
Until the time was right.
Until the promised descendant of Abraham, the Messiah, finally arrived. Once Jesus came, he fulfilled the law's purpose perfectly. He lived the faithful life Israel couldn't.
And then Paul says, Jesus took the curse of the law, the consequence of Israel's failure, upon himself in his death.
Right, he absorbed it.
No.
So after that, going back and demanding people observe the Torah rituals for justification, Paul says it just makes no sense.
It's like ignoring the graduation and insisting everyone go back to elementary school.
Exactly. It neglects the new freedom Jesus won and shrinks God's global promise back down to just one ethnic group, which was never the ultimate plan.
Okay, this brings us to the really practical part. Paul's opponents would still be asking, fine, forget the Torah rituals, but how will these Gentile Christians live righteously? How will they know God's will without the law as their guide?
It's a fair question, and Paul's answer is, well, it's transformative. He says the new guide isn't an external code, but Jesus' own presence living in believers through the Holy Spirit.
The Spirit takes the place of the written law.
In a way, yes, Paul's clear. The law itself is good and wise. He even summarizes it, quoting Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself. That's the heart of it. But Paul argues the law, for all its goodness, couldn't actually empower people to obey it. It could diagnose the problem, but couldn't provide the cure.
It gave the what, but not the how.
You got it. In contrast, when people trust Jesus, God gives them his Spirit. And the Spirit starts changing them from the inside out, creating new humans who actually begin to fulfill the law's true intention, which is love.
So it's moving from external rule following to internal transformation.
Precisely. Motivated by the Spirit's power and presence. Paul then contrasts the destructive habits of our old nature, what he calls the works of the flesh.
Things like jealousy, factions, anger.
Yeah, behaviors that dehumanize us and break community. He contrasts those with the outcome of living in step with the Spirit. He calls this the fruit of the Spirit.
And that's that famous list.
Right. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. These aren't external ethnic markers. They're internal character qualities produced by the Spirit. This is the evidence of belonging.
But Paul makes it clear this isn't automatic, right? This fruit needs cultivating.
Definitely not automatic. It requires real effort and intentionality. Paul says, if we live by the Spirit, we must also keep in step with the Spirit.
Like actively cooperating.
Exactly. It's a daily process of choosing to follow the Spirit's lead, saying no to the old ways, actively cultivating these virtues. This ongoing Spirit-empowered life of love is what Paul calls the Torah of the Messiah, the law fulfilled.
So, stepping back, the whole point of Galatians is Paul is basically shouting that demanding circumcision and Torah keeping from Gentile Christians is, well, completely missing the point of everything Jesus accomplished.
Yeah, it's an adventure in missing the point, as you put it earlier. What truly matters now, Paul insists, is God's new creation, meaning this new, diverse, multi-ethnic family of the Messiah. People filled with faith in Jesus, empowered by the Spirit, and learning day by day how to genuinely love God and love others. That's the defining reality. They belong because of Christ in them, transforming them.
And that completely reframes what belonging even means. The debate started with these external things, kosher food, circumcision, Sabbath, visible markers.
Right, ancient legal requirements.
But Paul ends up focusing on this internal list of virtues, patience, kindness, self-control produced by the Spirit. It shifts everything.
It really does. So maybe the final thought for you to consider is this. How radical was it to move the primary evidence of belonging away from something external and ethnic, like circumcision, to something internal and universal, like the fruit of the Spirit? How does basing belonging on this ongoing internal transformation, rather than checking off external rules, change how we think about community and acceptance, even today?
Something to definitely think about. Thanks for digging into Galatians with us today on The Deep Dive.
Where discussion.
We'll catch you next time.